want to welcome Jacob Collins, who is a leading figure in the contemporary revival of classical painting. Jacob was born and received his formal training in New York and also studied in Paris. He embraces a variety of subject matter and is equally adept at portraiture as he is as painting landscape, still life and figural themes. I quite like the still lives in particular. While living and working in New York, Collins has established several painting ateliers in the tradition of the French Academy, finding the rich exchange of ideas amongst like-minded peers to be stimulating and beneficial to his work. These include the Water Street Atelier, the Grand Central Academy of Art, and the Hudson River Fellowship. Collins has been the subject of over 20 solo exhibitions, and his work is represented in numerous prestigious public and private collections, including Harvard's Fogg Art Museum, Amherst's Mead Art Museum, amongst others. So I'd like us all to welcome him to the stage, and Jacob, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay. I have my notes on my phone. Thank you, Fisher, for organizing this, and thank you all for coming. It's really thrilling to be joining with fellow travelers in the memory and continued inspired spirit of Roger Scruton, who really does stand as one of the few figures throughout the meat of the 20th century who I personally think pointed a way forward through what I consider a very dark cultural time. My talk is not very well organized. I apologize for that. But I'm going to have 4 parts, and I'll tell you what they are. First, I'll talk about myself a little bit. I'm going to talk about how I think we got here, here being why we need to have a conference like this. Then I might suggest what we might do. Then I want to talk about a personal hobby horse of mine, which is the issue in contemporary realist revival of the question of artists using photographs, not using photographs, and how to navigate that, and my thoughts about that, and then we'll have questions. I want to first preamble by saying that I'm going to be speaking about my experiences and my solutions, which have been hard fought, and they're for me, and hopefully they'll be useful and interesting to other people. There was a very interesting talk earlier about universalizing, and as I talk further, that I will engage with the idea with that. And I believe that there was a time, perhaps as we were discussing in the 18th century Enlightenment, when universalizing, philosophical universalizing of ideas about beauty and ideas about culture was very valuable and very interesting, but I think that doesn't obtain, at least to me, and I think to a lot of us right now. I think we're in a very different world, and so I'm not advocating that the things I'm suggesting are universally applicable or not even universally true, although when it gets down into the in the mud, I'll certainly often will fight for my opinions. So in terms of my autobiography, I grew up in New York City in a sort of relatively high culture environment, family, very much mid-20th century New York modernism. Not fervent necessarily, but with the underlying expectation that the developments, the successes of modernism were excellent and permanent, that they were a good. And so my own inexplicable childhood desire to do otherwise was kind of baffling to a lot of people around me, and a lot of very friendly people tried to gently nudge me to sort of get me to sort of get with the program and not be foolish. And other not so friendly people did the same thing in a less friendly way. my early, what sort of pushed me forward was a very simple childlike or childish quality of mine, which is that I could draw really well as a little kid, just the way kids can do things. Some kids can sing really well. Some kids, they're just born with something or other that they can do. They can incredibly fast or coordinated. They can have hand-eye coordination. I could draw well. And very often this is the case when a child can do something well, they just want to do it all the time. So I did it all the time, and I just was doing it constantly. And that evolved to be identity for me. So that was what I cared about. And what I cared about was drawing well. And that was it's a simple for a child what that means, but when you get older, it doesn't always, people, as they just sort of engage with that, it doesn't mean the same thing to everybody. But for me, it meant, and it still does mean, to depict the world with skillfulness and beauty. And even as a child, I wouldn't have been able to name it beauty, but there was some quality that there was a mysterious thing other than the skillfulness of depiction that I was always after. That was to try to make it just like a person who's a natural singer will not just sing the notes right, but they'll have a quality, and you'll hear them and you'll think, wow, that's lovely. What are you doing there? And they won't know how to describe it. And sort of in this, for me, it was to try to achieve excellence. And whatever that meant to me, it evolved as I got to be more worldly and saw things. I saw Rubens' drawings, and I saw Caravaggio paintings and Velázquez, and I saw Leonardo drawings, and I studied them, and I saw that they were really, really excellent. And as a young person, I didn't know exactly why, but I knew that they were. Basically, this was a youthful spirit of reverence for a lost art. I knew it was lost. I mean, it was obvious that it was, and because I was hearing it all the time, that it was an expired paradigm. It was dead. It was, relegated to the dustbin of history. It was a lost art and a lost world. And I was, even as quite young, and coming to when I was 12 or 13 or 14, I was very moved by this, and I didn't want to let it happen. I had one little funny thought. I was in my Latin class, in my textbook, in somewhere maybe in 8th grade or somewhere like 7th grade, there was a series of little photographs of the Roman emperors as we're reading whatever we're reading. And I remember just looking at them and noticing that as you go from the Caesars through to the Antonines, and all of this, you get to 200s, 300s, and all of a sudden, I mean, from where I was, what I cared about, they got really bad. And I wondered as a kid, I was like, what artist? Who was on duty when that happened? And I thought, well, my gosh, that's exactly what I'm looking at. Everybody got really bad. And something really, I didn't want to be on duty when that happened. So I dedicated myself with sort of, I guess, a lot of fervor. I really pushed and tried to make this, to make myself in a kind of young dream world. I pushed myself with the idea I would become one of them in this sort of magical fraternity. I'd be an exemplar of this artistic form. Now the question often comes up in conversation, especially when I was young, is what is it? What was the thing that I wanted? And it was to be like, or to re-inhabit the poetical world, because I think it's this idea that its skillfulness and excellence is meaningful. It's extremely meaningful, but without the visual poetry, it really isn't meaningful to me. I mean, not to say they're all those like tripod legs or something, one without any of which the thing falls down. But it was to be one of these figures, to dream to be one of these figures who I would say would maybe last from, I had on my bulletin board, images from, Montaigne up through Van Gogh. This is like, whether, Poussin and Leonardo and Velasquez, and I mean, I felt like they were one big family, and that was what I wanted. And so this thing, and I was fully aware that this was this sort of, whatever this was, arced brilliantly across 4 centuries until it was extinguished by the pitilessness of modernism. And that I was very aware of that. And I sort of felt that this that there was something once, as I'm repeating myself, and it was done away with, and I heard a lot that was such a good thing that it was done away with. So as so then I'm just trying to remember here. I was talking about the discouragement I met from people who the idea that what this was no longer relevant, morally suspect, because of associations with fascism or the lack of women's suffrage during the period when this art was, ascendant in the world, or slavery, or that to even try to do it was hopelessly unrealistic, and then also, or perhaps even inauthentic, to the extent that people would say that it's a little bit like being a Civil War reenactor. You're doing something that's sort of false at the wrong time in the wrong way. As subsequently people have developed the word LARPing for that. Like, sorry, somebody's calling me. Live action role playing is what LARPing means. It's like people, grown-ups, dress up and pretend to do things, and so that's sort of what that's what I faced. So as I started out this process in relative isolation, one by one I did meet kindred spirits, and this would have been in perhaps in the very late 80s, mid-80s, late 80s. I started to meet a couple other people. This really was very inspiring to me because I was expecting, even though I'm a relatively social person, I was expecting to be having a pretty isolated life. That there weren't going to be any fellow travelers, so I started to find teachers and peers and students who helped pull me away from what I guess, aside from the fact that it was just my natural, realistic understanding of how it was going to be, probably also a little bit of a romantic fantasy of like, I'm the solo guy who's going to do this by himself. And I came to recognize that wasn't going to happen, that all the artists that I loved most historically had come out of these very intense, very collaborative, very competitive scenes, and that if I was going to do the thing that I wanted to do, I needed that. And so in a strange way, this led me to this very happy and satisfying second career of creating these collaborative studios and ateliers and schools where, especially early on, but even still now, even though I was ostensibly the instructor and the leader, I definitely was the primary student, the greatest beneficiary, because as soon as I ran that flag up the pole, people came, amazing people started to come from all around who wanted to do the same thing and had a great deal of talent and a great deal had collected a lot of the knowledge that filled in the gaps that I didn't have. So that was very exciting. So then my life kept going, and that's the sort of my formation. The next thing I want to talk about is what I think happened. Forgive me for going into deeper waters than I belong. Obviously, I'm not a historian of any sort, or an art historian of any sort, but I'm going to give a little bit of a snapshot because there's been some talk about why is there so much antipathy to traditional culture and or traditional art. So we were already talking about it earlier. The natural starting point, even though it's starting right in the middle in medias res, is the French Revolution, where this was a sort of explosion of anti-establishment fervor, which we still live with. The sense of the sort of the moral good being associated with wiping out the traces of the Ancien Regime, or in the first place, just plain old the Ancien Regime, and then subsequently sort of erasing its evidence, has been with us for what is it now, 230 years or something. And it's not, I'm not even saying, it's not that it's bad, it's just that it is. And I think that to see the struggle that I faced, and that some people who are sort of on this sort of similar wavelength to me, I think it's sort of meaningful. And then throughout the 19th century, there's a playing out of the sort of the failures to achieve the goals of the revolutions, leading subsequent revolutionaries to be more to cut deeper. So, for instance, in after the revolution succeeded, and then subsequently you have institutions coming back. You have the bourgeois monarchy of Louis Philippe. Please correct me when I'm where there was a tremendous amount of iniquity and a tremendous amount of all of a sudden the Industrial Revolution hits France a little bit late. And you get factories with, basically wage slavery, and you have new revolutionaries who think, okay, well, maybe it wasn't the aristocracy, but maybe it's so civil society itself. Maybe there's something more. Things have to be overturned, and I think this keeps on going until you get all the way up into 1848. You get a tremendous this sort of a sense of how are we ever going to do away with the unfairness, and I think that fuels a great deal of energy, which we're still living with, which is we have to do away with unfairness and look at the things that are associated with unfairness. It's the stuff from before, and the stuff that I love so much. The beautiful things are so there's a lot of muscle behind the desire to undo the stuff I'm trying to put back together. And so, for instance, there is sure a lot of you know tons more about this than me, but the French sort of political activist and philosopher Henri de Saint-Simon, he writes sometime in the mid-1820s, he says something to the effect of, let the artists and intellectuals be our avant-garde. And as far as I could find, that's the first use of the word avant-garde in culture. And before that, it meant the guys who wildly rode their horses through the enemy line with their, sabers, whacking and chopping and getting behind the lines and creating panic before the main attack rolled through. And so the idea would be, let the artists and intellectuals be our avant-garde. So let them disrupt everything before we finally dismantle whatever it is we're going to dismantle. And I think the artists and intellectuals took that job seriously. And honestly, I mean, of course, I have my opinions about a lot of things, but I don't necessarily hold that to be necessarily bad. Maybe the iniquity was so terrible. Maybe that was something that needed to happen. But we have that, and that we have this when we are talking, as we were a minute ago or a couple hours ago, about museums and the people within the museums who feel that it's incumbent upon themselves to contribute to the continued dismantling. I think we've inherited this from somewhere, and it's not just something that got cooked up with postmodernism, although that certainly furthered it along the way. So in what I guess partially what I'm suggesting is that 19th century avant-gardism, even though it was in some ways destructive, it was also legitimate. It has to be seen as legitimate. I mean, but also one of the things about it is that the forms, and I want to talk about forms, that the avant-gardists operated within were the kinds of forms that I value. So you have Courbet was a tremendous avant-gardist. He was a social revolutionary, and artistically he was a radical, with Courbet's realism really was offensive to the classicists, all the sort of the academic idealism. He was painting people that weren't idealized, and I could certainly imagine being back then and thinking, well, these are people who are awfully ugly, and I think painting should be uplifting, and we should be painting people that are beautiful. But on the other hand, Courbet paintings are awfully beautiful. And there's an awful lot of the music of, I'm not, I don't know that much about music, but the music of the sort of sequence of avant-garde 19th century composers with their breaking open the encapsulation of classicism, going from Mozart to Schumann to all the way into like Liszt and Wagner. I mean, it's so spectacularly beautiful, and it's so avant-garde. So I'm not going to beef with 19th century avant-gardism, but here's this maybe a little bit of contentious point. I have this sort of come to the belief that there was a hijacking of the avant-garde, of the concept, of the name and identity of avant-gardism, which happened right around 1900, sometime between 1900 and maybe 1930 or so. And it was stolen and repurposed by sleight of hand, and the perpetrators were the children of 19th century industrialists who created all of the major enormous patronage. And I think of this new avant-gardism, which I don't think has very much in common with 19th century avant-gardism. It was, to me, from my opinion, and as I preambled, I'm coming to this both with strong opinions, but also these are my experiences. I see this as a very, very patronage-driven sort of series of events. And I'm trying to remember was it you who was saying that the artists of early modernism, we're sort of cherry-picking the past? Somebody was saying that when we look back and we think everybody was doing something. Oh, I think that was you, right? I'm sorry, yes. Nick was saying that we look back and we think, oh, everybody was a cubist in 1912 or so. And I think there's been a lot of what they call in sort of internet parlance retconning, where it's when they have to fix something in a movie to make it look like it's always been that way. It's called retroactive continuity of art histories in the service of this. So I think then what we have, and what I find to be it's like the destructive energy, and this is sort of what I faced growing up, the destructive energy of avant-gardism minus its sort of what would be like it maintained until around the turn of the century a sort of a reverential spirit to its previous form. So it was trying to serve a social. It really was a social activist. It was trying to get something done while operating within the rubric of traditional art. And I think that changed. Interestingly, once the avant-garde had been, once it had been formidably political, and it was made anodyne. It was like an anodyne pet for these super wealthy, children of the 19th century industrialists. And at the same time, it was made inaccessible to the uninitiated. And so there was a sense of that there was something very popular about 19th century avant-gardism, and it became inaccessible, needing someone to explain every part of it. So that's sort of, and in some ways, I come across a lot of people who argue that the sort of drive, the problem of avant-gardism and modernism being so destructive is a leftist plot. But I don't see it that way. Not to say that it isn't, but it's certainly, of course it is, but I'm not sure. I think there's a lot of villains in this, if this is a villain-driven narrative. Okay. So Okay, now I would want to move to my next section, which is what we might do. And as I what do I think we might do? How do we go forward? How do I want to go forward? And people who think the sorts of things that I think, what would I recommend? In this, just first I want to say what maybe we should not do, or what I would not want to do. The first one I would say is maybe it's probably not necessary, for me, not so wise to sort of universalize our message. I think probably I'm interested in a narrow message. I'm interested in, I'm going to get in a minute to the idea of specific forms, like what are the forms that we're operating in? How does a person access what we're doing? And what is it excellent? If you're going to say something's excellent, then what is it excellent at? If you're going to say something's beautiful, to me clearly, I mean, you could say it's beautiful, but if you don't know what it is, you're speaking in just a tremendously, if you don't speak its language, you're not really saying it's beautiful. You're saying it would be as if somebody found a old edition of the Inferno, and they came and they said, "Look how beautiful this is. This is the most beautiful cultural artifact, and it's got a leather binding, it's got gold embossing, and the typeface is great." But if they didn't learn Italian, if they don't speak Italian, if they're not reading Italian, they don't know whether it's beautiful or not. I mean, there's something about it that's beautiful. They're looking at it superficially, and they can say this is beautiful. I mean, that's a very exaggerated example. Another example would be, in a different way, if a person doesn't know the rules of basketball, they may admire what it looks like. They're gracefully leaping. And they may say, look how this beautiful arc of the decorated orange ball is so interesting. And the way, that's not nothing. But they're not, if you want to really know why it's a cultural form, it's a form. And, you go deep into that form, and then next thing you know, if you care, if it's what you're into, then you can talk about it. You can really, just the way, if you then spend a decade learning Italian, you could read that book and you can say, this is an amazing cultural artifact in a different way than you could beforehand. So that's where I'm saying, so to say universally, this is beautiful, I would say, don't know, it's beautiful at something. What is it beautiful at? What is it excellent at? That's so much of what I'm trying to pitch. And as I'm thinking with various friends of mine about the idea of how do you build patronage for, in this world for art that isn't, that's maybe some art in the family of things that I care about. You have to be able to transmit in a clear and accessible, difficult but accessible way, what are the forms? Like, what is it that, what are a form is a set of rules and tools, I guess. It's like, this is how you try to do this kind of thing. This is how Japanese calligraphy is done, and this is the brush that's used, and these are the practitioners, and these are the antecedents, and you go deep in, and if you're just looking at it, like I would, you would say, wow, that's beautiful. But you're not, I mean, what are you really doing then? You're not, I mean, not to say I'm not right. Yes, it is beautiful, but that's not the kind of roll your sleeves up and plunge into it kind of approach that I think is necessary to really allow the public, and particularly the educated and this sort of committed public, to engage with art forms. Another thing not to do would be, am I doing a terrible job with my time? I don't know, okay. To not be right for everyone. And I'm a big fan of allowing people to not care what I do. I think there's a tendency to be, and again, that's another problem with universalizing. Oh, if I'm any good, or if the thing I care about is good, everybody is going to like it. Well, there's a million things in the world that are probably awfully great that I can't that I just am never going to know about, there's only a handful of things that any of us can really go into. So I would say to worry about whether everybody likes me and to follow for that is to say seeking too large an audience is a mistake. I think seeking a small audience is the right way to do just about anything. Not to do, don't try, and this is it's easier for some forms than others. For architecture, you couldn't do this, but I would say to try one of the things to avoid is to operate within institutions that were created to extinguish the forms that we are trying to breathe new life into. And I think that means you can try to make new institutions and not try to, you're just walking into an ambush if you think you can get people to like you whose entire the framework of the institution is about, particularly in that so many art institutions were either made or remade in the first half of sometime between 1910 and 1950, when there was this ascendant energy of modernism was so strongly driven by the eradication of the traditional, what would have been considered Victorian, stuffy Victorian art forms. And now here's another one, which is just to avoid, which is to allow ourselves to become reactionaries, and I'm not doing a great job with that here, nursing our outrage and sharing our autobiographies of persecution and defining ourselves by what we hate. Forgive me for transgressing on that one even before I said it, but I just wanted to give you a picture of where I'm coming from. I do think it's important to not, to let it go. And this is sort of let it go. There's people out there who don't like you, and you don't have to try to defeat them. You need to. World is a big place, and there's going to be spaces where you're going to find people who do like you, and you let those other people let that drift away. Even if those people sit in high perches at institutions, it's still a big world. And then here's another one, which is almost the opposite, which is we should avoid allowing ourselves to neglect the difficult and impractical questions of taste as we look for allies with whom to lock arms and build a political and economic base. And Nick, again, you were also mentioning the idea of the too pretty. I disagree a little bit in some ways, but I think that in the world of realistic traditional representation, I think there's a whole lot of people who, in my opinion, fail because they're just making it too pretty. But I would say, you said they're making it too beautiful. I would say they're not making it beautiful enough, because beauty is a deeper thing than prettiness. But we'll have a drink and talk about that. And so it's very tempting to make common cause with people don't share your values with the enemy of my enemy is my friend, being the rationale, just because the modernist establishment dismisses an artist with the same language that they dismiss you or some artist that you love does not make you teammates with that artist. I mean, it might not. Okay, so then what we should do, discover and re-enliven the traditional forms, and the forms being specifically like what do you do, how do you do it, and what would be the rules of your revered antecedents. What were they trying to do, and how did they judge their success or failure? And it's a little late to do that, but I think you can try to pull that in and make yourself speak their language, and if that language is within a form, then you can successfully, to some degree, adopt a form. And then, of course, as all great forms, you add to it, you change it, you once you've absorbed it, like a form would be like the sonnet, which was an Italian form. I don't know much about sonnets, but everyone, Petrarch and all, were writing sonnets, and they were a certain way, and it was a revered form. All of a sudden, Shakespeare got his hands on it in the 16th century English, and they changed it, and they made it better, maybe. Certainly, they made it theirs. So you don't have to be slavish to a form, but I think the love of a form and the reverence for the forms that you inherit often will make you want to make them better in your opinion, or you want to operate in an original way within the form, which causes you often to sort of push against its edges. So in the case of painting, these forms are the European, coming out of the 1400s, of a blending of the Christian European culture with this fantastical resurrection of the ancient Greek and Roman antecedents. And so here's another thing I would say is valuable, and this is just a little, tell me what you think of this in the questions. Last year or 2 years ago, I sort of popped in my head this idea that we might use a term in painting called the long Renaissance, because I realized that there's this idea that there's the Renaissance, and then of course then there's Mannerism, and then there's maybe Tenebrism, or then there's Baroque, and one after another. But with this gap, this sort of chasm of time between what I'd consider the end of this, the last artists that I feel really belong in that conversation were born in the 1850s, maybe early 1860s. Not to say there weren't artists who were valuable, but there's a sense of, there's an arc that encompasses artists over, 450 years or so. And to me, it needs a name. It's something. It's over now. And I feel like partially it's what I had when I was 12 years old on my bulletin board. It ran from all the way up through that period, and I sort of thought of them all, and I saw, you have Ingres adoring Raphael. Just he couldn't stop. He spent his whole life trying to, re-inhabit Raphael. Or you have Courbet looking at Ribera. They're speaking their languages together, and then there's a thing. And it's, in the larger sense, I would consider it a form. And then within it, there's the subforms. There's, the German graphic tradition, like Dürer. There's the, printmaking in the 16th century. There's, of course, the Spanish still life painting. There's the, Dutch genre painting. Each one of these is a form. It's clearly a form, but they're all in a larger form. And the defining the parameters are, draftsmanship, a certain spirit of representation, and I would say a kind of a reverence and continuity, although there are irreverent figures like Bosch and, wild figures whose button underneath, you see the facture of all of these paintings, of all of these painters exposes their reverence for their form and for their larger world. That's what I want to talk about. That's what I mean, and again, there's a lot of people talking about much more contemporary art that clearly is either a repudiation of this form tradition or has moved on. That ship has sailed and it's doing something different. The world's a big place, and I'm not, just because I'm not interested in things doesn't mean I'm trying to delegitimize them. That's not what I want to talk about. I want to talk about, for the handful of people who think this thing is worth saving, I want to talk about, how do we save it? What are we going to do? And I spent my life, not only like from when I was a kid, desperately trying to learn how to draw and paint. I mean, honestly, desperately. I mean, it was crazy. I was like smashing my studio furniture like every day because it was so hard. Like my brushes were all taped. Sort of sadly, they all were like carefully glued back together because when I calmed down, I had to fix my brushes because I was, but I'm not, it's like tons of my friends have this. And when I started to bump into these people that I was so delighted to become friends with, it's like, wait, you want this same thing? It's like we all were like Dr. Livingstone, I presume. This is this thrilling moment of coming across ourselves. So, and then, okay, again, develop conversations about forms. And forms basically are categories, and I think in a philosophical way, it does seem like we can only really understand things within categories or through the concept of category, without I guess what I would consider without vertical separations between different phenomena. it's too much of a blur for us. It's like people would say we can only really think through language, which I think is probably to a great extent true. I think we can only really assess through category. And it's like any connoisseur the first thing connoisseurs do is they're just desperate for category. Okay, small audience. Oh, here's a thought about the small audience, which is it might not be a coincidence that the institutional avant-garde, which is this one that I consider this kind of sneaky thing, emerged at the dawn of mass media and public relations with the industrial printing press in the 1890s. And you have, for the first time ever, you have newspapers are more than pamphlets. You have, millions of copies, and then the radio, and then the television. So the whole 20th century, you've got enormous audiences. And when I look at the artists that I value, I look at whether it's, we were talking about Schubert, that's a super radical example, but what was like a couple hundred people ever knew what he was doing? Or even like the Greek, tragedians, 10,000, 20,000 people, that's like nothing. That's a poor Instagram following, Even Michelangelo, world famous, how many people was he really working for? The population of Florence, and then later the population of Rome and the Vatican? 10, 20, 30, 50,000? Tiny numbers of people. The Globe Theater, how many people were there? Compared to modern audiences. So what I would say is it's possible that there's this sort of idea, there's a name after a sociologist, there's the number of people you can work with, 100 and something or other. Somebody knows that, I'm sure, in here. This is a different concept, but it's the number of theoretical people an artist can be performing for, can be creating work for. Because you can have a conversation with maybe a couple thousand people, but can you have is it really good to be trying to have work for millions? Maybe not. Maybe that's not the right thing. Anyway, so I'm interested in a kind of small audience. Let's carve out the small audience of the people who care, who really want a piece of it, and go forward. Make it easy for patrons. Patrons are the missing element. In my little world, I started out by myself. I met some friends. I started my schools, the whole thing. We got a lot of artists who can draw and paint awfully well, but we don't have patrons. And it's not as if we just need money. It's that the patrons, the sophisticated patrons, are drivers. They're the driver. Of course, the money drives the market. The nature of the market is created by the buyers. And I imagine, I don't know too much about who the Pamphilis, what the Pamphilis were like, or the cardinals, but I imagine there were some pretty sophisticated, pretty thoughtful people to be putting together those collections, blending the art and architecture and sculpture and painting all together. So for this thing that I've spent my life trying to do, it's a couple years ago I came to realize, first I thought, I'm gonna do it by myself. Then I thought, okay, I need a peer group. And then peer group, great. We all, by tremendous collaborative effort, we did learn how to draw and paint reasonably well. But now this other thing is we need patronage. Not because we need to sell pictures, which we do, but because it's a conversation. It's a flow, and it's sophisticated, and in some ways participants who aren't the creators, but who are the drivers. Like the people who are so thoughtful about wine that they're buying. So they're creating the climate that allows these guys up in Oregon or wherever they are to throw out 80% of their grapes and make this perfect wine that they necessarily have to retail for $90 a bottle. Wholesale for $90 a bottle. That's only happening because somebody got the ear of a bunch of sort of retired Silicon Valley types and taught them about what it's like, how great this thing is, how fantastic it is, and you got to be a part of it. And they're just as important as, I don't know if just as important, but without them, the producers can't do it. And I think that's true in any serious cultural form. It's the patrons, and I think that we have to figure out how to make that happen. We need critics, and I think that certainly Scruton is a great example, but I do think that I don't, I think the critical language needs to be developed. I have various thoughts about that. Most of the criticism I come across is sort of built on a platform of kind of 19th century, 20th century sort of progressive political philosophy, sort of like a Hegelian sensibility of like things our cultural acts are made legitimate by their combination of being, both in creating conflict and progress, conflicting with the reigning paradigm, and then kicking the ball down the field towards some sort of telos of whatever we're going. Like the 80 years ago, it was the dictatorship of the proletariat, but there's still a lot of this sense of we have to destroy and move forward. And even when I was starting out, when critics liked me, the only way they could try to say I was any good was through this rubric. They would say, oh, he's really the new avant-garde, and you see the modernists are really the new establishment, and he's attacking the establishment. That's why he's good. I remember thinking, that's nice, I'm flattered, but it's not true. And also, that's not a framework that I like. I don't want to be doing that again. I don't want to be one more kind of roll of the wheel of that. Anyway, okay. Am I going to ruin our question and answer? Yes, okay. I'll skip my little private hobby horse. Anybody who wants to talk about the last thing, I'll be happy to talk about that. Okay. I think I said what I said. So, thank you.
That the institution is itself some kind of mixed up problem. I think I very much agree with your kind of take on the difference between the 19th and the 20th centuries and the relationship between an avant-garde that was fighting against an institution or academy or academies from outside somehow, that was in some kind of public realm which was a bit different to what was the official account and the official order, and that somehow something becomes peculiarly inverted in the 20th century, where the idea of the avant-garde becomes something sanctioned and supported by the institutions or the modernist institution of the museum and the gallery. I think that's important to kind of, because it means that even though it's all about destruction or challenging the old order, it becomes ironically an order of its own. And that then, of course, creates a completely bizarre sort of a reversal, whereby anybody who claims any interest in tradition is doing it as a sort of, itinerant or nomad or heretic who's no longer attached to the institutions that are built up around those traditions. So that brings me to the other interesting point, which is, well, how do we, if we're constantly tearing things up as we move forward, what's our relationship to tradition? Thirdly, I think it's important to recognize that in the traditions of making, of picture making, and of the hand and the eye and the facture of the artist as a kind of principal privileged space, obviously is undermined by technology. But when I've come to kind of teaching my daughter what it's like to look and draw, which we did in the lockdown, which was like a really inspiring moment, because I hadn't done it for ages and she's never done it. But there is something lastingly important about the act of making images. And I think we see that because mass culture, not the stuff made by corporations, but the stuff made by lots and lots of people. You see it on the internet, young people, a whole generation of people learning to and teaching themselves to draw and make images with a hand. It might be a digital stylus, it might be a tablet, I've seen this with my own daughter. But there is a passion and a desire for a facility to understand what it is that can be achieved by making one's own mark. So those are the kinds of things that I think are very subtly kind of set out in what you've been discussing. So I just wanted to ask you particularly, one thing I felt was slightly missing is, well, what is why should we, and it comes down to this idea of speaking to your little group or the small group. How do we go out there and say, well, this is the value of this. This is the value of this tradition to people who may be indifferent or not care? Or
I guess partially I would say, I don't know. Maybe
it's good, right? Something about. I mean, this comes back to your idea of the mystery.
Good at what?
Well,
it's good at what hopefully it's good at what it's trying to do. Meaning, it's operating within its form with some degree of success. I do think there are going to be people who are fascinated by these examples. And in my last little bit, I think one of the things that I think needs to be done is there's a funny thing about 20th century or institutional modernism. It took a real the dismantling of the forms in visual art. It's funny, it didn't happen in music. It's not as if people say, oh, you can't have bluegrass and bel canto and, there's this sort of sense of these little silos, little vertically differentiated categories in the world of music, and that's very healthy. And I think in fine art, for some reason, there's not. And I think it's very, very hard to get potential connoisseurs who are like magic. They're like the dream of any group of people. You want connoisseurs who are such nerds that they want to know how you do it, like who you learned from. Like, it's why the wine people that were like cigar. You talk to a cigar person, it's like they're crazy. But it's like they're driving that market, and it's like these nerdy connoisseurs, and I say that with love, that make the whole thing possible. They're sort of the kind of the nexus for patrons, and the patrons kind of absorb the work, the hard work done by done by these connoisseurs. And I think that creating a clear and propagatable understanding of the distinctness of the forms will sort of invite in these connoisseurs to do the work that they do. They can't help but do.
There's one very quick question, because I know this is an interesting point that we haven't broached, but and it comes back to the issue of tradition. It seems that visual art is particularly afflicted by the demolition of the repertoire. Yeah. Right? And I ask this because there are choreographers and musicians and visual artists in this audience, and they'll have a better take on it than I. But it's very interesting that in many, you think about the popularity of a film like Tar or Maestro, that the idea of the repertoire and of the tradition of an art form is still sort of maintained or has been maintained for a lot longer in certain genres and certain art forms than in visual art. And I wonder, so that's the peculiarity of this kind of collapse.
I think there's a reason, I mean, not the only reason, but one reason that's sort of, it's time. It's that wealthy fat cats will pay any amount of money, but they won't give away their time. They're not going to sit there for 3 hours listening to something they hate. They'll put something they hate on the wall. But it doesn't take a minute of their time.
But the key thing is that there are still institutions, or rather people who believe in their art forms, in the creative presence of their art forms in relationship to what has been done in that art form previously. You have mentioned music a lot. So it strikes me that one thing I've always found that was missing in my education and in the contemporary art world was any respect or any interest at all in anything perhaps before the Impressionists, if you were lucky. principally because the Impressionists, for example, could be harnessed to a political analysis of historical avant-garde revolution and progress. Anyway, but it seems that is completely lost now, and I wonder if we don't need to kind of pay a bit more attention to the idea of
older
continuity
history, like
yeah.
a kind of reverence for the ancient, which I love. I would love it if everybody wanted to dig into that, travel through Italy and
Yes.
look at all the Spain, the Prado. There's a lot of great things. 100%.
I'm going to point out to the Fisher has the microphone. Please, hands up, and I'll come to you. There's a gentleman here in seat 2.
Is it working? Okay, that was very interesting. Thank you you said a lot, so I just want to home in on one particular theme, which was the theme of the long Renaissance, which I really like, and how that notion comes into conflict with what Professor Sangwa was saying. He mentioned, he spoke a lot about plurality, diversity, unity, and this seems like a contrast.
Yes.
Because the way you speak is there is unity, there's a theme. There's the long Renaissance. The Renaissance itself is a rebirth of something that came before. So there's this. You seem to allude constantly to an intuition you have of a theme that runs through the Western history or the Western canon. So, and then you talk of forms, but you talk of forms in the plural, but then you also talk of a form. And I don't know, I got this impression, it's more of a feeling, I suppose, of a belief you have in a unity. And so I guess I want to press you on what you think about beauty and a historical continuity. Somehow, this may be starting to sound a bit Hegelian, a bit glow in the dark, so to speak, but this idea maybe that beauty and the continuity of the Western canon until it's sort of revolutionized, whether that be in the 19th century or especially in the 20th century, whether this unity implies some kind of homogeneous, a unity of content or something.
I think so. I think there's a unity of content. It starts out, of course, tremendously unified in 1200, and then this is like glue is gradually fracturing, and a lot of the beauty, cultural beauty, is of the in between of the thing, this enormous thing, sort of opening up for hundreds of years, and then with the infusion of the just passionate love of the ancients, and well earned, because their ancients are unbelievable. But I would say the question of, I'm not hostile to a kind of diversity, a sort of approach, love of many things, but I personally, there's only a handful of things I'm ever going to really understand. And so I'm never going to, maybe I am, maybe I'm going to really go deep in Mughal miniature painting. It's so beautiful. I mean, so far as I know from not knowing about it. But how am I going to, what am I going to do? I got my thing, and I'm just trying to sell my thing. And I'm not trying to repudiate or delegitimize other people's things. There's some things that I think are ridiculous, but that's my private opinion.
You don't want to be Renaissance. You don't want to be a long Renaissance man, so to speak.
Well, I love this long Renaissance, and I think it's all, especially as we're getting further away from it, it's all of a piece. So anyway.
Gent at the back, and then the lady in the middle here. So
I got the microphone now. So
you do indeed.
Yeah, you get power.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you very much for your speech, and that makes them greetings from Milene Fernandez from Selma Gandhi Club in New York.
Okay, very nice.
And we probably agree I probably agree with everything you said. Well, I think you avoided a topic that's pretty important when it comes to reviving tradition and having standards for beauty, especially in the fine arts, but in all arts. And that's the divine realm and the faith. And all these artists and all the traditional art that we have, especially paintings, they were all created by spiritual believers. They were all created by people who had a reverence for the divine. And that's something that is usually not talked about. And you didn't mention it
That's
in your,
big subject.
in
You're
your
right,
speech.
I didn't.
Of
Maybe
course,
I'm still on my path, yeah.
Of course, but I think if we talk about reviving tradition, that's an important part as well. What's your take on that?
It probably is. I mean, I have had, since I was young, when I was this fervent 25-year-old, I've had, one very, devout friend of mine couldn't believe that I wasn't religious because of how all of the sort of metaphysical and this sort of the way I think about things. Anyway, I don't know what that means, but I certainly am, of course, extremely aware of where it all comes from, and very sympathetic to the idea that it's possible that if we're deracinated, those are the roots we need to connect to really make this thing happen. But that's a lot of the thing. A lot of what to the small amount I've accomplished things, it's been other people coming in with their own passion and bringing something else into the equation. So maybe that's for someone to join me in.
Right, and just to mention it, I read it yesterday that Mozart sold more physical CDs than Beyonce last year. So at least there is hope, for the future.
That's okay.
Some works will, in the future, be lasting. Okay, thank you very much.
Can I just see hands for anybody else who wants to speak after this lady in the middle here, in row? Oh, this is good fun. D7. But any hands for? Because we'll only have 2 or 3. Yes, okay, and yeah.
Thank you very much for your wonderful presentation, and I also wanted to commend you on pointing out some things that are not often talked about. I really appreciated the previous comment, because I really agree that one of the main issues today is that we tend to neglect the transcendent quality that artists are looking for in everyday things, or just archetypes, historical archetypes, and I think that's what keeps the tradition alive, the archetypes that resonate universally to humanity. I think I was curious about your opinion, because I think one of the main things that irritates people a lot and makes them very emotional is the fact that when you have, just generically speaking, a grand composition about something grand, sacrificial, the Christian theme, great beauty, I think, makes people question themselves and ask the big questions of life, which are very uncomfortable. And I think it reflects we talked a lot about the zeitgeist, especially after the Second World War. It's the nihilism, and especially because the world population is so large, it's at a historical high. I think everything is at a greater scale. And so, I was curious what you think about that. And also, another thing, what I really love that was mentioned is that I think the visual arts are the most vulnerable ones, because we're visual creatures. I think more than 80% of the information we receive is through our eyes. And I think this is the main medium with which to manipulate people, and with which we allow ourselves to be manipulated, because it appeals straight to the emotions and to the heart. And then maybe if you give the intellect a chance, we might process intellectually whether it's true or not, whether it's good or not. So I'm curious about your ideas on this as well, because I find it to be quite vulnerable. As you said, music, probably not, because it allows you to be a little bit more still and listen.
Yeah, it's interesting. The sort of more visual arts, in my opinion, were sort of more devastated than any of the other forms in the 20th century. And I do think the sort of point I made sort of jokingly about the time issue, I think that is something to it, but I don't really have an answer to that. Yeah.
We have time for one more question. There's a gentleman here in the second row. Get Fisher to run around. Oh.
Thank you very much for an extremely rich and inspiring talk. My name is Mikołaj Sławkowski-Rodę, and I'm a philosopher and Roger's student.
Oh, good.
And I just wanted to relate to the idea of form that you used to describe what's happening in the big project of the long Renaissance. There's a certain form of art. And I just was very interested in what you would say on 2 related ideas of style and convention. So in the first half of the 20th century, several philosophers and thinkers who reflect on art and what's going on want to say that we now live in an age without style, without a style, and without a convention that we can relate to or appeal to. And this is partly because what the romantics think overcoming a convention or a style amounts to. So either you overcome a convention, there are two ways of looking at it. You either overcome a convention because you need new means to express something that hasn't been said before, or you want to express something that has been said before, but in your own idiom that kind of encapsulates your attitude towards it. And in the 20th century, apparently, neither thing is possible. Everything has been said already. There's nothing new you can say. And there's nothing uniting us as people who are trying to express something. And, you might say that part of the effect of this is that styles become, especially in painting, individual. You don't have a school of Pollock and so on, right? So I was just wondering, I'd be very curious to find out what you think about whether we need to think about some sort of revival of a style or a creation of a new style, and how would we go about
I would
it? Is it desirable, and if we can't have it, then what's the alternative?
I would say within any, I would say that we, meaning we, universally, I'm not interested in that because I wouldn't know where to start. I wouldn't know what that meant. But I would say within any group, it's inevitable. You have like a group of people doing something together, 10, 20, 30, 50, and everybody is trying to get it right. And maybe for a long time it's getting some skills, getting the chops. But then somebody does something in a way that has a flourish, and then everybody kind of gets on that. And that's the beginning of a style. And then someone else, adds their little voice, and that becomes, it's not just the skillfulness, it's a kind of originality, it's a cleverness that somebody adds, and all of the little added clevernesses of all of the different people who are part of it together becomes a style. Maybe one person for a while is sort of leading with a real charisma, visual charisma, and that can, there's a handing of the baton in any group of artists, and that becomes a style. And then, I wouldn't want to sort of try to recommend a kind of one of the things I like about the period that we're in, as opposed to 60, 70 years ago, is that there was more of a totalitarian quality to American or European post-war art. It was like this is this, and then this is this, and we all think what Greenberg told us to think, and we all think this. And then one of the aspects of postmodernism, which mostly gets a big black eye, is this idea that, look, we let 1,000 flowers blossom, you're doing that, and I'm definitely a child of postmodernism in that I'm sort of letting it all go, and I'm not interested in somebody or myself imposing a style on anyone who doesn't want it. It's just voluntary. Step up and do this with me or don't. But I just wanted to touch on the idea of overcoming a style, and as I thought about that a little while ago, it's different from what you're saying, but rather than romanticism, but in the very same moment, I think there was a tremendous idea, sort of ideal to be styleless, and I think this came out of a kind of a post sort of scientific revolution positivism that influenced the artists of this, maybe right around the period of 1800, where they were trying to get more and more and more realistic, so that the realism gets to be so high that it's more realistic than it is of a school. So it's like moving away from Rubens, which is so obviously that style, or moving away from Ribera, moving away where there was national styles. And I think there was a very strong desire to be telling the truth as a scientist. Everyone was obsessed with scientists in the end of the 18th century. And then these are the artists that then did invent photography. And then the camera became the end result of this tremendous positivist desire on the part of artists to be only telling the truth in a style-less way. Anyway, this isn't exactly what you were. It relates to the idea of overcoming a style. Yeah.
So just very, very short comment. So you'd say the big project of the long Renaissance is not just over in terms of its means of expression and the kind of dialogue was going on, but as that sort of thing altogether, the kind of long project that people are involved in is gone, not just in terms of that one, but any possible
Well, I think it's
project of that
over,
kind?
but it's just at the very edge. We can maybe grab a little hem of its garment and just try to pull it back and pull. We can. I think that it's not unbridgeable. I mean, it's not like the Renaissance where it was like 900 years of darkness, and they were digging up something once in a while and marveling at it. We have, I studied with a guy who studied with Jérôme's student. So it's not that long ago. So, there's a lot of this kicking around that if we want to weave the threads back together, I don't think it's impossible. So, we got one more.
I think we're going to have to wrap it up, I'm
Okay.
afraid, but
We'll
I'm
talk
sure
later.
that, yes, there's plenty of time to talk face to face afterwards. I guess we must wrap it up here. I will bring Fisher on to tell you all what to do next. But it leaves me to thank Fisher and all of you for being such an interested and exciting audience.
Yeah, thank
and
you.
particularly,
Great audience, great questions.
and particularly to Jacob for such a motivating and interesting and open discussion. I hope you take a lot more from it and that we continue the conversation. So thank you, Jacob.
Thank you.